Welcome everyone, and welcome to the 350 New Mexico / New Mexico Solar Energy Society speaker series on community solar. Community solar comes to New Mexico is the title. And my name is Tom Solomon. I am co-coordinator of 350 New Mexico. I'm also on the board of NMSEA, as is Andrew Stone and maybe a couple of other members here. And tonight we have with us Andrew Stone and Dylan Connelly to present this talk. But before we do that, I'd like to do one thing that we have often done with the speaker series and just acknowledge that we are occupying Tiwa land. So I'll just read this statement. Welcome. We would like to begin by respectfully acknowledging that the land on which we gather is the traditional territory of the Tiwa people. This acknowledgement is a small but important step towards correcting the stories and practices that erase Indigenous people's history and culture. Honoring these truths to the Tiwa people, both past and present, by helping to increase public consciousness of Native sovereignty and cultural rights is a step towards equitable relationship and reconciliation. We are grateful to our many brothers and sisters from the Pueblos and the Dene people, including Pueblo Action Alliance, Red Nation, Dene Care, and the Greater Chaco Coalition, for the profound and important work that they are doing to protect our water, our land, and communities. By honoring this cultural legacy and the unique insights it brings to the present, we make all of our communities stronger. So thank you for that. Tonight, the program is going to be on community solar, and I will briefly introduce our two speakers and then allow them to expand on that. But we have with us Andrew Stone, board member of New Mexico Solar Energy Association, architect and New Mexico solar advocate, and someone involved with community solar for many, many years, as well as Dylan Connelly, who is the director at Affordable Solar for Commercial Solar Energy Development. And they have both been involved in bringing community solar to life in New Mexico through advocacy and helping with the rulemaking and others that they will explain to you tonight. And I'm gonna kick it off by allowing Dylan to join us first, and then we'll have his remarks and presentation followed by Andrew's, and then we'll have probably plenty of time for Q&A. I think we'll have about 20 minutes each and then plenty of time for Q&A. I would note that if you have questions as the presentations go on, feel free to type those into the chat. Either Dylan or Andrew may answer some of those simpler ones if the opportunity arises as the talk goes on, and we may preserve some of the more interesting and lengthy questions for the Q&A session after we're done. So with that, Dylan Connelly. Thank you, Dylan.
Thanks, Tom. I'll just show my screen here. Great, so I'll just do a little bit of an overview on community solar, and then Andrew will go into some specifics about the particular program here in New Mexico and some of the recent information we found out from the PRC about how projects are going to be selected, which I think people are really interested to hear about. Just a little bit about me. Let's see, clicking through. I'm not sure if people have ever heard of the Blue Zones, but Blue Zones is a book that was written by a fellow who was investigating folks who lived a long time, and there were concentrations around the globe where there were these hot spots where people were living over 100 years. And one of the places was in Japan, and he found out one of the reasons why they lived a long time is each of the people there had an ikigai. Ikigai translates roughly to that which makes life worth living, having a purpose in life. And so I set out a couple of years ago to come up with my own ikigai, and that was to demonstrate and teach living in balance with the energies of nature. And so one of the things I love to do is to kind of teach and talk about some of the things that I've done and the things that I'm working on, which is mostly in renewable energy. So this is my house here, and I was able to install heat pumps in order to be 100% electric at my house, and then added solar on the roof to be essentially 100% electric with an electric car and family of 3 right now. In addition to residential solar on my own house, I also work for local solar developer and installer affordable solar. And we're the largest solar installer in the state. And we are working on community solar development and then probably building a lot of the projects as well. And so just a little bit of background on me, and then talk a little bit about community solar. I think a lot of people will generally have some basics, but not everyone is fortunate enough to have a nice flat roof that isn't shaded. And the concept around community solar is that if a large solar facility is built, then that can be subscribed to in order to still have a share of solar, but not necessarily put it on your own home. And it works pretty well for, if your house isn't a good fit for solar, but it also works for people who are renting. So trying to create equity around the opportunity to go solar. And so participants will subscribe to a share of a community solar farm. And then that power is produced and sent to the utility, and the utility is providing a credit on the electric bill. And that credit tends to be around 10 to 15% reduction in electric prices. That is pretty consistent with if you were to get solar on your own home and then do a loan or a lease, probably more likely a loan, tends to be a pretty similar return. So what's great about community solar is you get a similar return without having to put it on your roof, without the complications there. And then also, if you move, you can just sign up for community solar again at the next home or apartment. And community solar is sent to the utility directly, and then essentially is virtually providing power to businesses and homes. A large solar array such as this could be subscribed by multiple large facilities to be anchor tenants, and Andrew will talk about this a little bit, but community solar in New Mexico is taking a lot of the lessons learned from other states in order to think about who's going to subscribe and how. Community solar in New Mexico is new, and I'll talk about the timelines, but lots of other states have done it to various levels of success. Something like 25 states have programs. Community solar is not something that needs to be created by legislature, which is how it was created here in New Mexico. It can just be enacted by utilities. El Paso Electric, for example, has a program for Texas for community solar, and they've had that for a number of years. And it's a lot like the Blue Sky program that PNM has, where you can just pay about $5 to $10 more a month to be subscribed to a community solar facility. Oftentimes when these programs are done by utilities, they cost a little bit more than you would normally pay to be 100% renewable. Community solar programs done through private markets typically are, like I mentioned, a 5, 10, 15% discount on your electric bill. And there's often a carve out specifically for low income, which Andrew will talk about as well. The major programs are Colorado, Minnesota, New York's got a thriving program. Maine is now expanding. A lot of New England's. The ones you see in Florida, I'm not as familiar with. I think that's probably more of the utility-led ones. And California doesn't really have a really big model right now either, surprisingly. Why community solar? So I like to show this slide because solar on rooftops is about $3.50, could be up to $4 even more right now with the price of panels going up. And the output is not as high as a solar field, while also being more expensive. So the cost per kilowatt over 25 years is significantly higher for a rooftop system than a solar farm. So there's these economies of scale allow the community solar developed projects to pass on a lot of savings to subscribers. One thing I will note is that if you do solar on your own home, you're able to offset power for about 15 cents. Whereas a solar facility like the one on the bottom, through community solar, they're usually credited about 7 cents, 7 to 8 cents. So about half as much credit because the solar is not being produced at the home. If a speculative solar project like the one down here on the bottom left was to be produced without community solar, instead of being granted 7 cents from the utility, they'd be granted about 3 to 3.5 cents. And that's half as valuable as a community solar project through this legislature. So that's really the reason to have community solar programs, is because there's a mechanism for pricing a higher value on these facilities. And the 7 cents is just an estimate. We're still waiting for that information from the utilities on how much it's going to be credited. Andrew will talk a little bit about different sort of ownership programs. Primarily, most community solar programs have moved to more of a subscription service as opposed to an ownership service. Subscription services are the way I described earlier, where you sign up for however much power you use to be fully offset by the community solar facility. And you don't sign a long-term contract, you don't pay anything up front. You just, however much power you're getting credits for from the system, you pay monthly and get about a 10% discount. For example, what I tell folks is that if you normally pay $100 for your electric bill, you'll probably get about a $50 credit from the utility through a community solar program. And then you'll have to turn around and pay $40 of that back to the solar facility, community solar facility. So that's where you net the $10 savings. So it can be a little confusing because there's two bills, one from the utility that's lowered, and then one from the community solar facility. And there's a decent amount of work to get people signed up, get their information in order to pay, but that is sort of part of the whole process. And then the ownership model is where you would pay upfront for a share of the facility, and then you wouldn't necessarily need to pay monthly anymore for your portion. So you'd pay upfront in order to then have savings down the line. And again, the subscription model tends to be much more common these days. So where is community solar in New Mexico? So folks are always kind of wondering, when can I finally sign up for this community solar stuff, and what's that going to look like? So the state passed the community solar program March 2021. We are now April 2022, and the PRC, per the legislature, has come out with the rules for the program. There still are some holes, some things we'd love to clean up. And the bill credit mechanism for how much the credits are going to be worth is not out yet. But that process is still being shored up. The rules are technically out now. And what we have is an RFP process, a request for proposals. So there'll be a selection process to decide which projects are going to move forward. The process is out, and Andrew will show you those kind of scoring criteria for who's going to get selected. But we expect projects to be submitting into an RFP probably in September, October timeframe, and then selected for final selections towards the end of the year. At that point, projects will then go through the interconnection application process with the utilities. That's going to take 6 to 12 months, and then installation of a lot of these facilities will take another 8 to 12 months, meaning that we're looking anywhere from early to mid 2024 before people will be able to get savings on their electric bills. I mentioned that the PRC, the New Mexico PRC, is working on several consequential pieces of dockets right now. and rulemaking, and not just community solar. While they're working on community solar, they're working on the interconnection manual rewrite. The interconnection manual, for those that don't know, was first written in 2007 in New Mexico, and that's what enabled the current processes that we have around net metering on your homes, and it's a very consequential piece of or docket that they're working on right now. At the same time, they're also working on integrated resource planning plans for the utilities, which are determining how they're going to, how much renewables they're going to put in, if they're going to do gas, those kinds of things. And they're also working on rulemaking around grid modernization, which is also consequential, because that's deciding whether or not or the process by which utilities will upgrade their lines for more solar and more renewables. So I'd recommend tracking the PRC if you're interested in sort of putting in your 2 cents about more sustainable policies. We have been fortunate that the PRC has been leaning towards favoring more distributed renewable energy. So, and a lot of these dockets are going to be wrapping up before the end of the year when the PRC does change over. So we're excited about community solar because there's 200 megawatts that's been allocated to this, and there's going to be a lot of job creation around a lot of projects going on at the same time, and a lot of training for the future around for New Mexico to go towards 100% renewable energy. So it's definitely going to be an extra strain on the industry to do this much all at once and this many different projects, but that's going to really help the industry grow, as well as bring a lot of money into New Mexico for these projects. People sometimes ask, what makes a good piece of property for one of these projects, and I just thought I'd point out that when you're looking for a site, you're looking for these 3-phase lines, 3 lines up there on power lines for these bigger projects, and then you want to be fairly close to a substation, and just explaining that just because you're close to transmission lines like these ones on the right, that's not the way the system connects. They need to connect to distribution, which is on the left here. Most of these projects, the larger ones, the little bit less community scale, a little bit more like larger scale ones, these 5 megawatts are typically all single axis trackers, as opposed to the older dual axis trackers. The dual axis trackers tend to have a lot more maintenance and higher failure rates. Also, the price of panels has come down significantly, so minimizing panels and maximizing output isn't the name of the game anymore. So people sometimes ask, why are we not doing those anymore? So that's my main portion. I want to leave plenty of time for people to ask questions. Andrew, what are your thoughts? Did you want to answer any questions in between, or do you want to kind of start on your sides?
If I could suggest, let's just do both back to back and then get to Q&A.
Okay, great.
Andrew, you are up. How's your audio? You'll need to unmute, sir.
It's better now.
Okay, good. All right.
And let me find my, where's the keynote? Okay, for some reason. Hold on 1 minute. And of course, that always happens. There we go. And now we go back to share. Okay. So hello, everybody. And I call myself a solar evangelist. And the reason is because I have been in this game since 1974. And this is me as a, now I wonder who among you knows what is on my pocket protector. This will be a quiz you can answer in the chat. Anyway, I've been involved with solar for a long time. And after 27 years with a software career at stone.com, working with Steve Jobs, I decided it was time to take those winnings and bring them here to New Mexico to see how more people can have solar than just people who can afford it easily. My farm is completely solar. We have an electric tractor now and 2 EVs and enough panels to drive all of those. So community solar is great, but who benefits? And so I'm all about trying to help people understand that if these are just out-of-state investor-owned fields that you sign up and get your 5% off on, the community actually does not get so much benefit. But as the community gets more involved and is part of the process in these things, more benefit accrues. And critically, what I'm all about is the notion of how communities can own their own solar facilities. And basically it would involve maybe a nonprofit at the receiving end, but it's going to be concerned investors like myself that don't want to put our money in Wall Street. We would rather sink it into actual, I was going to say concrete, but there's no concrete in a community solar except for under the pad of the inverter maybe. But sink it into real life things that help real life people. And how does that help? Well, we'll go into those details later, but I just want you to know that there's something called community-led, community-owned, community solar. And it's the shining, golden, equitable transition, utopian Star Trek vision that so many of us came from and hope to see before we have to leave. And humanity only transitions one time into renewables. That's it. And so the people coming perhaps from the same place they came before, the conquistadores, to get our sunshine, I would be very concerned right now about being able to have your own solar. You've already heard about parts of Albuquerque cut off red zones. Basically, they're saturated by Meta's solar facilities have saturated those lines, and now there's no room for your solar. Well, we need to be the owners of the solar, and there is a way to do that we'll talk about tonight. But first of all, how can any community, let's say you have a community coming together, what are the requirements? Well, they can only be so big, but don't worry, 5 megawatts is a $10 million project, so smaller might be more beautiful. And then when it comes to, can an apartment building with so many tenants have community solar? Well, the owner of the building would be very smart to put in some sort of a way that you could figure out how to save your renters money by having solar. And that could be done probably behind the meter right now. It wouldn't necessarily require community solar. But let's say you had 10 people who lived in a small village in northern New Mexico. Now you're talking about sort of a minimum scale community solar. And there's certainly plenty of land out there for that. But the idea is you don't have one hog. You can't have Walmart say, I'm going to go completely solar and take all the community solar and just give a little bit out. And that's why there's a 40% restriction on one single anchor. Now, those anchors are critical for getting financing and whatnot from the bank. So you do want one, and we'll talk about an anchor that I would like to see. And the main thing is that smaller off takers, and by smaller, 25 kW is quite a bit. That would be a business. A home might only need 2 or 5 or 7 or 10 if you went full fossil free like Dylan. So the critical thing about our program that we fought so hard for was that this was meant to fill the gap for those people who rent or don't have credit to have solar. And those are our low income customers. And when I tell you that 47% of New Mexicans qualify as low income by the definition of 80% or less of mean area income, so therefore it varies by neighborhood, etc. But you would see that our citizenry is greatly affected by energy burden, the percentage of their household income that goes just for their energy needs. And in some communities, it's as high as 29%. And therefore, that is the intent of this program. And so anyway, the cool thing is it can be anywhere in the PNM area, for example, and you can be signed up to that facility. So if Kiwa Pueblo builds one and, you know, somebody starts a cooperative, you can sign up and move down to, you know, another part of the PNM territory and still have your community solar. But the things that you need to consider to drop your proposal in their lap: legally binding site control. And we can talk about that because who owns the land might bring more benefit to the Commonwealth. So when the municipal owns it, maybe that income will offset another fireman or police officer. And the other thing, and this is where community-led community solar will excel, the commitment to meet and exceed all the regulations. Like, why make just 30% for low income? Why not a full 50% of the project be for low income? And those commitments are met with points in the RFP system we'll discuss. And then if you're in a village, and so every part of our state has different jurisdictional authority over it. So in the city, we have the city zoning and whatever. And so being able to make sure you have permits on the tricky ones, like, oh, make sure that the state land office, or if it could be possibly a sensitive archaeological site, you would need a study like that. And then you need $1,000 to submit the bid. So right away, that would be something that should say, oh, if it's a nonprofit and something, it should be a free bid, because already we believe that there is a desire for over 3 times the capacity that will be offered. And that was already what was demonstrated prior to the law even becoming a law. So let's discuss how you win these bids. And so, as we said, if you get your stuff approved, you get some solid points for that. That in a community, that can get done very quickly, because if the mayor takes an interest in your project, let me tell you, zoning works fast in those situations. Now, here's something where you get 10 points for experience. Well, let's say you've worked with low income, you get 4 of those points. So if you're a housing authority or care about how housing and stuff like that, that might be a winning thing. If you're an EPC like Affordable that has many multi-megawatt facilities under their belt, they nail 3. If you're somebody who's gone around and done subscriptions and run a subscription service, you can get 3. So you might want to bring in a partner who already has these capabilities, and you could get those points. 10 points to get your finance secured. That's what we're going to discuss in a little while. That should not be a problem. I think there's enough people worried about climate change that we want to put our money where our mouths are. And as Dylan showed you earlier, that if you're close to a 3-phase, that is those high, when there's 3 of them up there, you get some points because it costs money to bring your solar to their grid. And the closer you are to an even larger interconnection, like a substation, the 12 kV connection, you get some more points too. And if you are building a community solar in an affected neighborhood, I guarantee you there'll be a substation. A lot of that kind of infrastructure, and this is a piece of the equity that will need to be worked out, is slammed into neighborhoods that where they can get away with it. So now we're going to win some more points on our bid, because we're going to try and win up to 8 points by going from 30% that's required to 50% of the subscribers. And so that is metered out along the way as you go from 30 to 50. Now here's one, and if your organization takes on the task of doing the billing and collecting from your customers, you get 8 points. And the reason is it's possible to fulfill your low income quota. For example, by, let's say you're working with the Bernalillo Housing Authority and they're just one subscriber and they're taking all 30% of your project. That would make it very easy on a business level for those people, but they're not really serving the community in the way that a nonprofit that was billing and perhaps had mechanisms for debt relief and even created a fund for debt relief, for some of their subscribers. Those are all possible things. And the next one is something that I know our commercial developers only wanted to give it 2 points, but to not have to give credit checks, because there's no reason to take people's dignity away, to get them solar at a better discount. And then the big one, no sign-up fees and no finish fees. You don't want this, you don't want churn. You want to get families that really want to do this and it can really help them. And so we have help recently from the announcements from the White House on the LIHEAP programs and tools that will help get energy efficiency to the people who need it, because solar is wonderful. But what about reducing your usage by half? Just by a little insulation and some weather stripping, that's golden. So there's still more points available if you are willing to say, our nonprofit actually is creating equity in the world by providing 27% off of their bill. You've heard that some companies, some utilities make you pay a premium, and some will give you 5% off and 10 and maybe 15, we hope. But offering a full 27% guaranteed for the low income customers, that would be a mitzvah, and that's why it's worth some points. And so there is opportunities for people of goodwill and people who want to do this for what we call triple bottom line: the money, the environmental, and the social. And by social, I mean all these panels, community solar. The panels are cool, the electricity is cool, the discounts are cool. But the building of community and a resilient community around something as empowering as your family and your neighbor's family doing something about climate change now, that has a value, an intangible value, I think we will all come to appreciate. And so the rules actually included benefits to the community, because I was there harping for them with Mayani, and Dylan was backing me up. So first of all, following New Mexico ordinances and our statute, our vets get 10 points awarded to them, and our businesses, our New Mexico businesses, 5 points. So we do get a little lift there. The next critical thing is what we do. Why aren't we training our youth in these communities that we build these community solar facilities in? That is a golden thing. And this may even have a silver lining that will be represented when we discuss money in a little bit. So, hey, buy the materials from women, vets, and BIPOC people, Black, Indigenous, people of color. I think that's called a New Mexican. And we got 2 points for the thing that I'm trying to pitch, which is there are ways for the community to own the facility that we're going to discuss. And anyway, it turns out that being with a community or nonprofit entity or a tribe gives you some too. So what you're really seeing is that, yes, we can get our RFPs approved if we can design good ones. And by we, I mean, I just go around inspiring communities. They have to say we want to do it and then come together. And there's people like me and Dylan, et cetera, that can give expert advice on this. But it really has to be people standing up to do it. And a few more little points offered. And if you can come up with something that really helps the community, they throw in 5. So that's our last Hail Mary to win some. So here's the deal. We are not the first people to think about why hasn't the energy transition happened faster? I have 10 kW panels sitting out here for 4 months waiting for an interconnection because I have a battery. And this battery is only for use on site, non-export, and only charges off the solar. But anyway, I'm not going to go into the details. The reason why we're working very hard at the PRC on interconnection and grid modernization is because if all these things come together correctly, the value of solar, how much you are actually helping the grid with your batteries and your solar during the peak hours of the day, will become a known thing that will allow people to invest more widely in solar than is allowed in a monopoly state like New Mexico. So if you've been looking at this table while I've been babbling on, you'll start to understand that basically the benefits travel as you go to the right. And what we really want, what we're really trying to create is the maximum economic benefits. And because there are federal tax credits on solar projects of 26% this year, with the possibility of the Build Back Better bringing back the 30%, with this caveat: if you're doing a community solar and you have workforce development, 40% of your project cost can be retrieved as a tax credit. Well, the role of somebody like me is trying to find people like that who are in the position to say, I'll give you money if you can take away my taxes for me. And so that is a tax equity partner. And that is how public and private can come together to monetize, that is, take advantage of the money that's sitting on the table should a private organization develop a solar project. Munis can't get that. Nonprofits can't take it. Tribes can't take it. And that's where it's going to be behoove us to be able to be creative and come together to form ways to bring private equity to community solar through mechanisms like this. Now, I'm talking about what's called slow money. I call it solar capitalism. The sun shines on us every day, and it's enough to power everything. And so in the same way, a capitalism that's not based on growth, but is more based on the energy input coming onto the planet every day, which is terawatts and terawatts. It's just insane how much solar we get. That is solar capitalism. So I would expect if you do a solar project on your home, you might expect to see 15% internal rate of return. In this same regard, a community solar might have 15, 20% IRR, but now imagine dividing up those returns between the people who developed the project at the beginning, and that could be a nonprofit to start with, and other people putting in the capital, dividing it up with the community who is subscribing it to the facility to give them the maximum 27 to 30% discount on their solar. And then here's the deal. After 5 to 7 years, probably 7 to 10 probably now, the people who own the community solar at first can sell it to the community because they've taken away that they've so-called monetized, or they have used up the tax equity and the depreciation of the facility. And now it can be sold at almost nothing to the community, who can easily get financing, and the amount of revenue coming in from the subscribers will then be able to evergreen that that nonprofit or that community. In the case of, let's say, a mutual domestic water association in northern New Mexico, where it makes sense to put your solar and your energy with your water, because water takes so much energy, and that water has already been traditionally billed to every member of the community. And so there are mechanisms in place that could serve in New Mexico as the subscriber organization for community solar. There's risks and things to learn about, and we do that another night, not tonight. Let's just go into the top level, which is, what is community? What are our circles? And I will never forget Kurt Vonnegut. In one of the many books, they are all related with Kilgore trout. And in the term, he came up with a term called a karass. And a karass is a circle of people, a certain subset of people. And they all, of course, overlap. And so, for example, communities of faith come to mind as people who would really want to do something about going solar as fast as we can and being able to provide bill credits for their parishioners most affected. A project like that can go onto the roof and the parking lot, and maybe it would do the church and 50 parishioners. The next scale up would be what I call a real community solar, because a megawatt is truly a garden and a half. I mean, that is 4 to 6 acres, 4 if you cram them. But so in the city, there are little lots like that. And a lot of times they might be right next to a substation. Wouldn't that be great? And that community solar might be able to serve just the neighbors right around there. And that the example is that several of us from the Rio Grande Community Foundation, we've been designing a combination solar voltaic parking lot combo with panels over ag. Why, you might ask? Well, we're looking at 6 to 8 degrees temperature rise in the next 50 years, according to the 50-year water plan. And we need to look at ways to reduce water evaporation from our crops. And even too much sun, you can only use so much sun. And so some of these notions of agrivoltaics are coming perfect timing with community solar, because A lot of times the ag is in the same communities that are most impacted. And then there's the Stretch project, where an organization that has a little bit of time behind it, like the 50-year-old NMSEA, to stand up a cooperative and maybe work in my dream world, we'd be working with the Pueblo, maybe Kiwa, Santo Domingo. We'd be able to find a major off-taker for a 5-megawatt facility. I know of a city that already needs 2 right now, and that's before electric buses and stuff. So there is what the possibilities that lay before us. I'm glad Dylan laid out the timeline so you understand this is the year of coming together with your communities to teach yourselves about this. All these slides will be available. And tell me, who is your community? Let's find it. I'm happy to come chat with anybody. This is my ikage. Anyway, it's why I live. It's what, I mean, I would be remiss if I didn't tell you the poem by Hafiz that moves me every day when I look at the sun. It goes like this. Even after all this time, the sun never says to the earth, "You owe me." Look what a love like that can do. It lights the entire sky. The sun shines on all of us, people. We've got to, this is our New Mexico's last chance to raise ourselves up. So often we've been in an extraction state. And it takes all of us. There's my email, but Steve Jobs, he would never end a presentation without saying, but that's not all. And I want you to be sure to remember that we're going to be celebrating the solar pioneers and our 50 years of solar advocacy that has helped create this world that I swear, if we carry this vision forward, will be that vision I had when I was young. Thank you. Let me stop the share here.
Thanks, Andrew. Okay, did we get some questions in the chat? Just a few. So Dylan, if you want to come back on and help us maybe go through the Q&A, then we'll switch over to that one.
Yes, if anybody has any particular questions they want to raise their hand, click on the, let's see, I think it's the reaction button and then the raise hand at the bottom there. I did see an early question from, let's see, David. I mentioned he's on the board of a 155 unit co-op. Units are individually metered and they're interested in installing a solar array for the common area and then just kind of wanting to understand the process. And I think there's kind of two things here. One is there's community solar, which allows projects to be sited anywhere in the utility, and then subscribers can be anywhere. And then there's virtual net metering, and those can be two different things. And I do think that there's a lot of value for New Mexico passing a virtual net metering process. For example, when you have let's call it an apartment complex, you could have one solar system on that apartment complex credit multiple meters or the entire facility without the complications associated with a more detailed community solar program. And so I'm a strong advocate of California has those allowances, other states have those allowances, working towards allowing that type of process. This particular community solar program requires 30% low income, requires an RFP, kind of a bit more of a substantial lift for a single kind of group of users like that, if that kind of answers that question. Andrew, do you have any other thoughts on that before we go to Clifton?
I was just going to say that the new the California Expo, Solar and Storage Expo is like coming up. And last year, the big deal was basically controllers and software, etc., and hardware that let a apartment building spread its solar to individually metered tenants. And it might even have charge spots that would be specially metered to give the cheapest price to their clients because it's either off peak or from the solar on the facility. Anyway, that's that whole vector. In other words, we want to pop up and remember community solar is just one ornament on our Christmas tree in our forest full of Christmas trees. But also on our Christmas tree is your own rooftop, which, because this is going to be 2 more years, if you can't wait for solar, geez, just put it on your own roof if you can. It's honestly a fantastic investment. And but the joy you will have when you get your book club, the 10 of you, or your coven, the 13 of you, or whatever it is, together. We really want to try to make a carve out that doesn't have to involve all the tediousness of the oversight needed for those big out-of-state guys who are, they're here for money making, so they need oversight. Nonprofits won't need that. So anyway, I'm going to see if I can find.
Clifton, you also had a question. Did you want to unmute yourself? You're still muted there. Just
All right. How about now? So just maybe this is another ornament for the Christmas tree, and I may be in the wrong room. But I look at, I'm in the sort of between Indian School and Constitution in one of these older Albuquerque neighborhoods that has the utility lines running mostly down the alleyways between the backyards. And it occurs to me there must be a lot of power loss there. And I kind of have this idea that, an infrastructure bill would help solve some of the transmission problems of solar. All of this conversation revolves around essentially banking the solar via transmission somehow. And so that's going to be an issue. And so I have this little dream where the, unsightly telephone poles and, eroding wires and whatnot are replaced. And, I don't think it would be as expensive to replace those poles with solar panels where appropriate in the alleyways, and then sort of use those as micro boosters. I guess I'm dreaming, but I'm wondering about the engineering for that and where that fits in this spectrum. And I appreciate the opportunity to express that. Thank you.
Well, I'd bring up 2 things first, which is those poles, you think of them as electricity poles, but guess what? They make a lot of money off of subcontracting the lower level to all the cable, telephone, everybody else. So those ugly things are a big money maker. So there's that problem. But really, honestly, I believe, and this is what the modeling that we need Sandia Labs, and they actually are going to be working on this in conjunction with the co-ops, etc. Imagine modeling the grid because of its topology with batteries and production everywhere. All of a sudden, you have the grid is peer-to-peer, and my batteries are going to take care of a lot of voltage regulation, flow, doing stuff, taking care of the grid in my neighborhood with the smart inverters. So we're going to move into a world that is really, transmission is great, but it's so expensive. Nobody wants it. It takes 10 years. We'll be dead by the time if we go that way. But the batteries are proliferating. The prices are dropping. We're trying to develop policy that understands the cheapest grid is the grid with community solar and gigantic batteries so that you're not using the transmission at night to heat these homes or whatever. So we're moving forward, but we have a market and there's inertia in the market. So what we need are these. So another thing I was going to mention, another ornament, is something we've been working on for a long time, which is called property assessed clean energy, PACE. And commercial PACE, the idea would be a family owns their store and they don't have money for solar, but they want solar. Well, why couldn't they pay their taxes? Why couldn't there be a sewage assessment, a solar assessment? Why couldn't it just be on their tax bill? It's a 25-year investment. It goes with the property. It's no longer something that you need credit for. It's something your property has the credit for. And that has, well, it's unlocked a lot of capital in the commercial space around the country, and we've had trouble getting it stood up here, but that's a little off topic, but it's another way that we can get capital. Basically, unless there's a way for regular people to help the transition move along faster, it will move along too slowly.
Okay, thanks, Andrew. Dylan, were there any other questions that you saw in the chat you want to highlight?
Alex had asked when can he invest in community solar, and I'm maybe just curious what kind of investment he was interested in, like investing in a project or sort of subscribing, if we answered that question.
This is,
Well, I think you answered not until 2024. Is that right?
Yeah, if you want to be an individual subscriber to a system, it will be 2024 most likely, based on all the different things that have to happen in order to get there.
And to get there faster, consider, you know, how you and your meta group can come together to be that subscriber. I mean, to organize the subscribing organization. What's it called? I forgot. What did we say the name of that was in the bill?
A subscriber organization.
Yeah, the subscriber organization. And I think, well, so that'll be interesting. But the other thing for us to begin working on immediately is the ability for a person to be able to at least meet the needs of some of their neighbors in the case of an apartment building. And at least something like that would be another way that would allow the transition to move faster. So.
okay. Any other questions from the group? Anyone has had something that just popped into your mind that you'd like to ask? I think anybody who wants to unmute themselves and ask a question, now's the time.
How can we change legislation coming up to make community solar better? Because obviously if we're oversubscribed, 200 megawatts is not enough.
Well, I'm going to say one thing and Dylan will hopefully say something else. What I'm going to say is we have 1 week to have a comment, and I believe that Jane E., myself, and anybody else who feels so inclined can pitch in. I have a very simple argument. So far, 435 megawatts of capacity have been desired, and we have 125 in the PNM area to dish out. So I don't see how any little community-led, community-owned project could get going with that disadvantage, unless there was a realization that these should not be judged against the same, you know, there needs to be a small carve out for these projects that are, you know, honest to God, community-led, community-owned projects. And one thing I think we can advocate for in this 1 week. I know that Dylan has been working nonstop with the other developers to try and make sure the law is not cloudy and confusing, and just cleaning it up so that we don't risk lawsuits that further delay the whole process.
Okay, so Andrew, if I just want to clarify, you're saying this is a final week to give inputs to the rulemaking body, the PRC?
I
before
think you
they're
had
done?
to
Is
have
that what
been
you're saying?
maybe, had you been on the docket and been part of it, maybe you can do that. In other words, I think
As
you
an
have
intervener?
to be a part, an intervener, yeah.
Yeah,
Okay,
and I think what we're talking about is sort of like a phase 2 to this. You know, this the community solar that was passed through the legislature is 200 megawatts that we keep talking about. To give you a rough order of scale, that's about that project alone is probably 1/10 PNM's total system capacity, maybe 1/15. So fairly low. They do 2.5 gigawatts, which is an order of magnitude higher. That was a negotiation between utilities and industry and then community that wanted community solar. And so the big question is, what is the second phase of community solar going to look like? And can that be more of the same? And then also possibly, as Andrew's discussed, how do we get more community solar projects? How do we also have virtual net metering? Can that happen earlier? And a big pathway for that is the PRC and then the legislature. And that you can be engaging with the PRC and interconnection rules to get virtual net metering. That's a pathway. And then also engaging with the legislature for preemptively extending community solar without needing to wait till 2024, which is sort of their current process, which is, let's see how the first round goes before we consider a second round.
so if anybody that's on the call wants to engage in the short window that's left, looks like Andrew, you put your email into the chat, so they should contact you at andrew@stone.com, and you can work together with Andrew and see if we can find a way to get those thoughts to one of the interveners in the few days that are remaining. That's what we do.
And I'd also recommend just attending the open sessions for the PRC to start to, I put a link in there just to kind of educate yourself about some of the dockets that they're discussing, because they are very consequential and they take into consideration what people think.
Great, thank you. All right. There was a question, I think, from Atsa, who may not be with us any longer, but, oh yes, you are, there you are, about the availability of the slide deck and this recording. And so 350 is recording this, and we'll clean it up and then post it on our website sometime within the next week. We're usually a little bit better than that. So that'll be where you can see the recording. And how about the slide decks? What, how can we get that, make that available?
I just emailed it to you before the thing, Tom.
Oh, okay.
And you can post it on the 350.
Okay, very good. And Dylan, how about your set of slides?
Remember,
Yeah,
he has kids.
I can post those as well.
Okay, great. So we'll put those on our website, and let me just maybe briefly show you where that would go. So we have, gosh, and I'm embarrassed to say I'm not exactly sure where we're posting our material. It might be under calendar. Here it is. Yeah. So if you go on, let me share my screen so people can see this. So if you look at 350newmexico.org. That's our homepage. And if you go over to our menu and you go to the calendar, that's where our events are posted. And we have past speaker series talks, and you can find them here. So both videos and the slides are posted in that section. And so we'll put them in the same place. Again, 350newmexico.org, calendar events, and look for past series of talks. Okay. We'll make them available in that way. So I'm thinking that we are close to adjourning if there are no additional questions. Atsa, you were the one who asked about the talks. Did you have another question that you didn't get a chance to ask? And if not, no worries. Okay, so I'm thinking that we'll wrap it up at this time. And thank you all for joining us. And we will have possibly another speaker series talk. I don't know if we've identified the topic, but it would be on May 23rd if we come up with one. And Andrew is giving us the live long and prosper sign. Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you.
Great to see everyone tonight. Appreciate your attention, and I think this is a great talk. Thank you, Andrew, and thank you, Dylan, for putting this together.
Thank you, Tom. And great to see you, Dave. David.
All right. Good night, everyone.
Thank you.